Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, I wanted to make this video answering your questions and responding to your comments that you left underneath my demo of the Fane AlNiCo A60 speaker a few weeks ago, because so many of you got in touch both on YouTube and over on the gear page. A few of you emailed me too as well, which was nice. So I did try to respond in those relevant sections, but I wanted to make this video today fleshing out what I said and just talking a bit more about that wonderful speaker and how I put the video together. So I've got all your questions printed out here, so I'm just going to rattle through them quickly today. Brian Cullen says, the DB4 and Les Paul sounded amazing, almost a Leonard Skinner sound. Yeah, absolutely, it really was, wasn't it? I think if I'd mixed the audio for that with more room mic and less close mic, that was the Gimme 3 Steps intro tone right there, wasn't it? So that's the key to classic rock, folks. Les Paul, Marshall type amp, turn it up nice and loud through a top speaker. No pedals needed. Stephen Wilson. I like to think that's the real Stephen Wilson. Probably not. Lovely review, Joe. I hope you can find some time to do some comparisons of the Fane with the different Celestions. And along the same lines, the Fly 06 says, sounds great. How would you compare it to the Celestion Gold or Cream? Now, so many of you commented asking about how the A60 compares to the various Celestions, and I am going to shoot those videos within the next few weeks. I tend to work about a month in advance with my videos, but I will sort of drop them into the scheduling and sort of just sprinkle them out over the next few months, because you know, those Celestion speakers are speakers we all know and love, so they're a very good reference point for the A60. So I'm probably not going to shoot like a 4-way shootout because the workload in that and the editing is absolutely ridiculous. So I'm probably going to do it as 3 separate sort of shorter videos, the A60 compared to the Cream, then the Gold, then the Blue, because they should be interesting videos because, as I said, they're benchmark speakers, we all know them, so you can get more of a comparison as to how the A60 really sounds in certain amps comparing it to those ones. Let's see, Bluesful, some really nice tones there. Telly into the Cornell was my favourite. That combo was superb. It really was, wasn't it? With the EQ dropped out, so it was that honky, middly champ thing, sounded spectacular. By the way, how do you manage to crank the amps in that room? I've got very tolerant neighbours and I'm half deaf, is the honest answer. This is a very, very small room, and cranking up like a 36 watt amp to the point where it's really barking and distorting, it is unbelievably loud in here. So I tend to kind of play for a shorter period of time at that volume as I can. Usually for doing my normal demo videos, I run the amps sort of fairly clean with headroom to spare, so they're not absolutely belting. And I tend to get the gain sounds from pedals, which is probably what I'll do in the Celestion videos, to be honest. But obviously in the A60 video, I was absolutely diming the amps to get the speaker really cooking. So yeah, I try to play for as little time as possible and, you know, apologise to the neighbours afterwards. Harry Wallington, loved the playing, Joe, but if I'm honest, when it comes to speakers, overwhelmingly the thing that matters is singing lead tone. Yeah, fair point on that. I didn't really do too much lead playing in that video, primarily because it's much easier to play the same rhythm part twice and then edit the footage together, rather than playing like improvised lead stuff and then the edits are a bit clunky. So I tend to, when I'm doing comparisons, stick to rhythm playing purely for that purpose. But yeah, when I do the A60 versus Celestion videos, I'll do my best to include some soaring lead playing. Lord Quilton says, great job, Joe. Sounds pretty amazing. Telly and Z-Rec was indeed outstanding. Yeah, I love that amp, and with that speaker, it was wonderful. They wouldn't be manufactured at Celestion, perchance. They look very similar. No, they are completely separate companies. Celestion, you know, is a British brand. I think a lot of their speakers are made in China nowadays. I think a few are still made in the UK, and I think they're based over Surrey area. Fane are a sort of family-owned business up in Yorkshire. So yes, they do look pretty similar, but I think, you know, a 12-inch speaker is a 12-inch speaker. The mounting holes have to be in the same place so they fit sort of universally in amps. You need the speaker, you need the driver. An AlNiCo driver needs to be sort of tall and thin rather than round and fat. So that kind of dictates how AlNiCo speakers will look. So it's probably similar to like a Formula 1 car or something. The Mercedes and Ferrari look very, very similar on paper and from a distance, even though they're quite different underneath, and they've been manufactured completely independently of each other. So yeah, they look similar, but no, Celestion and Fane are 2 completely distinct companies. Sarah Hay, hi Joe, the Fane sounds great. Could you describe a bit how you balance the 4 mics into phase? Delay compensation VST. Cheers. Yes, absolutely. Let's go over to the computer and I'll talk a little bit more about that now. Cool, so when I am recording a demo video, generally speaking I'll pair two amps together because that seems to give a more full frequency sound. So generally the two amps I'll use are my two Dr. Z's, the Z-Rec because that's a very bright defined Vox AC30 type thing, and the DB4 because that's a darker, more thumpy Marshall type circuit. So you get the low end of the DB4 and the high end definition of the Z-Rec, and they just slot together really nicely and just sort of fill in the gaps that they both leave out. But of course for this video I was just using single amps because I was demoing the speaker. So when I was miking up the speaker, what I would do is I tend to think of it kind of like a home stereo system. And there is a video coming out in a few weeks about how I make videos, and I talk about this a lot more in there. But simply put, when you think of a home stereo, you don't just have one speaker. You'll have a subwoofer, a mid-range speaker, and a tweeter. And the reason for that is because the subwoofer needs to be absolutely enormous to shift the amount of air and energy to reproduce those low frequencies. But because of that, they can't move fast enough because they're so big and cumbersome to reproduce the highs. And likewise, a tweeter is very, very small, so it can move incredibly fast and get those high frequency sounds, but it has no energy in terms of shifting low end, so you don't get any sort of weight out of them. So you tend to have various speakers paired together to really kind of fill in all the gaps and reproduce the sound in a full frequency way. And that's how I think about miking up a guitar speaker. So I will use a ribbon mic on the outside of the cone, and that's my kind of thumpy low end type sound. I'll use a dynamic mic, which is usually a old 1970s Sennheiser MD441, similar to a 57, but it's a bit more kind of boxy in the mid-range rather than fizzy. I just prefer that. And that's my mid-range. And then I'll also use a condenser mic to capture the sort of really defined sparkly high end. And that's usually put right over the center of the cone, over the sort of dust cap, because that's where all the sort of really bright high end frequencies are. And what happens then is I record those three mics together, and I will record a room mic as well to add that kind of 3D realism and just a little bit of natural reverb, because close miking a guitar amp when it's an isolated guitar part with no reverb or delay can sound a bit sterile. So what happens then is it goes into Pro Tools. So this isn't a speaker demo, but this is a video I shot yesterday. And if I zoom in on this waveform here and make it a little bit bigger, you can then try to work out whether they are in phase or not. Now, the old school way of doing that was to put headphones on and go into the live room and listening to what's going through the console. What you would generally do is flip the phase of one of the mics and then move it around so that the sound goes incredibly thin, because then when you reverse the phase back to normal, you know it's as in phase as it's possible to get. It'll never be absolutely perfect, but it is, as near as damn it. But what we can do nowadays with a DAW is we can zoom in and look at the waveforms. So this is very much a sort of, it comes with experience, this, and knowing the gear you're using. But the best way of doing it is to zoom in on the waveform and look at the sort of the waves here. So if you look here, those peaks are pretty much in line. Those peaks are pretty much in line. That trough is pretty much in line. So if we zoom right in on this, you'll see that zero crossing point is within, all three mics are within a sample of each other. So they are as in phase as it is possible to get. Three separate mics on three different parts of the speaker, capturing slightly different sounds. So they're never going to be absolutely identical, but they are as close as they can possibly be. So you then know that the three close mics are in phase. And if you really want to check, you can throw a one band EQ on here with or any plugin really with a phase reversal switch. So I'll have to do this in the post edit, but if I play something now which is in phase, and now if I reverse the phase, you'll hear that the sound goes really thin and hollow. So that's a surefire way to check that everything you're doing is in phase. Now the room mic, I really love room mics, and especially for demos, it gives a more kind of realistic representation of what I'm hearing in this room. Now, because of all the reflections and the fact it's not buried in a speaker, the room mic will never be kind of perfectly in or perfectly out of phase. It's a very different sound source, but it can be relatively in or out. So again, if you just flick the phase button and whatever sounds thickest and more sort of open, that's in phase. So that's a general way of doing it. So when it comes to the phase thing, it does come with experience, as I said, it comes with knowing your gear. I've spent the last 10 years putting mics on guitar amps, especially in this room, and those mics on guitar speakers. So I know what works. You know, I did a music degree years ago, and audio engineering was a big part of that. So I spent a good part of the last sort of 10, 12 years miking things up and learning about phase and whatever. So it does come with experience and knowing, but you know, there are ways to check in Pro Tools, whatever DAW you're using as well. So when it comes to mixing the mics then, generally speaking, those three mics and the room mic all running at equal volume generally do the trick at sort of having the defined high end, having the thumpy lows, and having the mid range with a good amount of sort of three-dimensional ambience as well. If anything I record is ever sounding a little bit off, like it sounds a little bit too bright, I'll bring the condenser mic down. If it sounds a bit thin, I'll boost the ribbon mic up. So I never use plugins to correct anything. I just adjust the mics a tiny bit if needed, but generally speaking, those four running at unity volume, all perfectly in phase or relatively in phase for the room mic, that's what comes out of your speakers. There's no trickery, it's all done sort of properly with a good phase alignment, everything's working, and yeah, that's how I do that. Gain and Pain, great name. Did you use Neve preamp on this record? Yes, I did. The three main preamps I use on the three close mics. One is the Warm Audio WA73 EQ, which is a Neve style pre with an EQ section, although I wasn't using EQ for the video. And the other pre I use is a MicTech MPA 301, I think it is, and that's a dual channel Neve style pre without EQ. Compared to the preamps in my interface, especially my old interface, but kind of the new one too, the Neve pre's, they tend to give a more accurate representation of what I'm hearing in the room. Pre's in interfaces tend to, in my experience, sound a little bit fizzy, and they can give the impression that what you're hearing is quite sort of fizzy in the mid-range when it actually isn't, whereas the posh Neve type stuff gives a more accurate representation, and ultimately what comes out of the speakers is the most important thing. I want to give you the best representation of whatever it is I'm demoing, and those preamps let me do just that. And finally, AlNiCo A61, so this one's really small. I guess I'm going to have to try an AlNiCo speaker at some time. I had a blue years ago, but barely remembered what it sounded like. Any suggestions for one to try that goes well with Tweedish amps? Car Telstar is what I'm playing now. What does AlNiCo give you over similar ceramic speakers? So, with the Tweedish amp, yeah, the A60 sounded great. I also like Celestion Blues in Tweed type amps, which work really well. But in terms of what the AlNiCo gives you over ceramic, there isn't really a clear-cut answer to that. There's generalizations that, in my experience, do seem to largely be true, but it very much depends on the exact speaker as to how it compares to a ceramic. I'm hoping to demo the Fane F70 soon, which is the kind of ceramic equivalent of the A60, so we might get some more answers then. But generally speaking, as a very broad, sweeping overview of this whole concept, in my experience, ceramic speakers tend to be a bit more pokey in the mid-range and be a little bit more dynamic. There's more transience there. Whereas AlNiCo speakers, they tend to have a more sort of sad face EQ. They've got more low end, more sparkly highs, and they're a bit more relaxed in the mid-range, if that's an EQ curve. Whereas a dynamic is more kind of pokey in the mid-range with less lows and less highs. So in terms of EQ difference, that seems to be as it is. The AlNiCos tend to be a bit more compressed, so it's often said that AlNiCos are more suited for studio playing because you typically add a lot of compression to most things in the studio anyway, and also sort of lower gain stuff because that sort of extended high end doesn't always play nicely with overdriven sounds. When you dial in an overdrive pedal, when you add gain, you tend to take treble out because that sort of fizzy top end sounds like a tin of bees. So AlNiCo speakers are arguably less suited to heavier gain stuff, but you absolutely can use that. Every tone you hear on my channel is an AlNiCo speaker. All my amps are AlNiCo. So even when I'm cranking them up and the gain's running with a distortion pedal or something, they're all AlNiCo speakers. So they absolutely can work. But generally, the compression of an AlNiCo is arguably less suited to kind of heavier live playing. You kind of want that dynamic that really smacks you in the face when you dig into the guitar, which you tend to get a little bit less of with an AlNiCo. It's also worth pointing out that AlNiCo speakers are typically a lot bigger in terms of physical size than ceramics. If you compare the Fane A60 to the Fane F70, you'll see that the AlNiCo has a much kind of taller sort of bell-like driver, whereas the F70 is a sort of a typical ceramic, sort of rounder but bigger, flatter ceramic magnet on the back. So that's also something to bear in mind. I had to modify my Hughes and Kettner chassis in order to fit an AlNiCo speaker into it, because with the AlNiCo in there, it was fouling the preamp tubes. They were kind of resting on the back of the speaker because it was that much bigger than the vintage 30 that it came with. So something to bear in mind. But as I said, those are very, very broad, vague generalizations there. Very much depends on the speaker, the ceramic and the AlNiCo you are comparing as to what you'll find. But those generalizations do seem to largely be true. So I think that's the end of your questions, folks, and there's a little bonus for getting to the end of this video. The guys at Fane have been absolutely fantastic in that they've put together a discount code to use on their speakers. So if you want to look into Fane speakers, if you buy from their website and use the discount code Perky10, then that'll give you 10% off anything on their website. So that's really, really good of them. And yeah, I'd love to know if you're going to take that up and check out some Fane speakers. So please do comment underneath if you're a Fane user or you want to check them out or whatever. But that discount code, I don't think at the moment there's any sort of time limit on it. It's just running in the background. So if you use Perky10, you'll get 10% off on the Fane website. So there we are, folks. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope that kind of clears up a few things about that video and how I put it all together. If you have any more questions, drop them underneath, and I'm going to make those Celestion comparisons within the next few weeks and kind of drop them out in the scheduling of the videos that are already waiting to go live. So thank you, folks. Please do carry on subscribing to this channel. It makes a huge, huge difference when you do that, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.